Chapter 16 of The Wheel of Fortune by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. How Bert Found His Father. Conclusion. When Bert recovered his senses, he found himself in a dark, noisome place which had all the appearance of a cellar. There was not a single aperture in the walls to admit either light or air from the outside. On a beer barrel standing in the middle of the floor was a lighted candle end stuck between 3 nails that pierced a piece of wood. It served hardly more than to make darkness visible. "For heaven's sake, where am I?" he exclaimed in surprise as he raised himself on one elbow. Then recollection asserted itself, and the struggle in the cab flashed through his mind. "Where have they taken me? What do they mean to do with me?" Of course, these were conundrums he could not solve. "And Helen? What have they done with her?" This reflection was more distressing to him than the contemplation of his own condition. While he was considering these matters, the door which opened into the place moved on its hinges, and a man entered. It was a tall, dark man with a mustache and black eyes. "Woke up, have you?" he said to Bert with a peculiar smile which exposed a large gold tooth in the center of his mouth. He stood near the candle, and the boy had a good view of him. "Captain Staggerback!" he gasped. "Oh, I see you know me after all," grinned the bogus officer. "You attacked me in a cab last night." "Yes, and a rather tough proposition you were. I had to give you a clip over the head to quiet you." "You got the best of me, that's evident. What'd you do with the young lady?" Bert asked anxiously. "You needn't worry about her. She's all right." "How am I to know that?" "Never you mind. I've something more important than her to talk about. I want that certificate of mining stock I let you have to raise the $100 for me from your landlady in Philadelphia. I found out that she gave it to you. Tell me where you live, and give me an order to be admitted to your room during your absence. And when this certificate is in my hands, we'll let you go." This was certainly a proposition the boy did not care to agree to. The mining certificate had amounted to nothing, it is true, but he did not propose to give this crook a chance to go through his trunk and room and take all he possessed. "You must think I'm a fool," replied Bert in a decided tone. "You'll certainly prove yourself one if you don't accede to my demand," said the fictitious Captain Staggerback. Bert remained silent. At that moment another man, rough and unshaven, slouched into the cellar. One glance at him, and Bert gave a shudder of apprehension. The newcomer was Rake. "I reckon I got you this time, or you can't give me the slip," he said in an ugly, threatening voice. "You've done me up twice, and I'm thinking it's my turn this trip." "Pshaw! You're not going to touch him if he gives us that certificate of mining stock," said the tall man hastily, favoring Rake with a wink which Bert observed. "All right, partner, if you say so," growled Rake with a malevolent grin. "But I'll teach him another time, all right." But Bert readily perceived that the bogus captain had no intention of keeping faith with him. Supposing he did agree to put him on the scent of the certificate, which the boy believed to be merely a ruse to enable the fellow to get into his boarding house without suspicion, when he would probably try to make a clean sweep of the place. "Are you going to write that note to your landlady that I asked for?" asked the big crook, producing a fountain pen and a blank card from one of his pockets. "Supposing I won't write it, what then?" answered Bert aggressively. "I reckon if you don't write it, you'll go into the sewer," said Rake coarsely. "The sewer?" exclaimed the boy. "That's what I said, the sewer." "Perhaps you have your doubts about it, eh?" chuckled the dark rascal. "Well, we'll let you have a peep at it. It runs under this building, and it's a mighty handy thing to have around when you want to get rid of a body." The crook bent down, seized a ring on the floor, and raised a trap door. A strong odor immediately filled the place. "Fetch him over, Rake, while I hold the light." Rake lost no time in getting a firm grip on Bert, and then dragged him over to the aperture. "Now look down, and you'll see what's waiting for you unless you write out that little document." With these words, he let the trap fall back into its place again and regarded the horror-stricken boy in triumph. Bert believed they intended to do away with him in any case, for he knew Rake's feelings toward him were particularly bitter, and that he thirsted for revenge. He felt there was little hope for escape, and that unless God intervened on his behalf, he was doomed. "You want it upstairs, Cullies," said a voice at this juncture. 3 pairs of eyes instantly turned toward the door. There stood a youthful specimen of moral depravity with the butt of a cigar between his teeth. "All right," returned the dark man impatiently, and the youth disappeared. "We'll give you a few minutes to think the thing over," grinned the crook to Bert. "All we want is a certificate, which is valuable to us, though not worth as much as your life to you. As soon as we get it, we're going to let you go." The 2 scoundrels passed through the secured door, leaving the boy to very bitter reflections indeed. He saw nothing but a horrible death before him. "But I shan't die without an effort to save myself," he said desperately. He sprang to the door and found it was barred as securely as he had supposed it was. Taking the flickering candle, he hurriedly examined the 4 walls of the cellar as a forlorn hope. Not a break was to be seen, not even a single displaced brick. But he found an iron bar standing in one corner, which had once upon a time been used to secure a window shutter. It was a formidable weapon in the hands of a desperate person. "At least I will sell my life dearly," cried Bert as he seized upon the bar. At that moment he heard sounds at the door, as if his enemies had returned. Stationing himself so that when the door was pushed open it would conceal him for a moment, Bert waited. The key was turned in the lock, and the person who entered was Rake, and he was alone. He held a card and a stylographic pen in one hand, and his mission was evident. Bert darted upon him and brought the bar down with a force that stretched the ruffian on the floor. Then he sprang through the opening and shut and locked the door, putting the key in his pocket. He was now in a narrow, littered passage as dark as the caves of Erebus. Feeling his way along the rough stone wall, he at length stumbled against a rude wooden stairway which led to the upper region. As he mounted this, his ears were saluted with the sounds of noisy conversation, deadened by the wall of the passage above. The dim light of day filtered through a dirty cobwebbed window at the end of the passage. At the other end was a door, which looked as if it communicated with the street. "If I can reach that door unobserved," thought Bert eagerly, "I may be able to make my escape." With no one in sight, this did not present much difficulty. But when he laid his hand on the knob, he found the door locked, and there was no key. "Hard luck," muttered the boy, a sense of keen disappointment assailing him. There were 2 other doors, but both led into the rooms whence the babble of voices issued, and which, from the clinking of glasses, he rightly judged to be a bar-room. "What shall I do?" he murmured. "Perhaps the stairs to the 2nd floor will answer my purpose, and from one of the rooms up there I can drop to the street." He turned to carry out this plan, when suddenly the door nearest him opened, and he stood face to face with his other enemy, the so-called Captain Staggerback. The recognition was mutual, and for an instant surprise held them motionless. Then they grappled. But this time the advantage was with the boy. Besides, he felt he was fighting for his life, and this added strength and desperate energy to his sinewy arms. He tore himself from the other's grasp, struck him with a heavy blow on the face, and sprang up the stairway. The crook recovered himself and followed at once. Bert dashed open the first door he came to and rushed into the room. A well-built man lying on a bed sprang to the floor and confronted him. It was a desperate moment for the boy, and then he recognized his father. "Bert, my son!" ejaculated the man in amazement. "Father!" Then the door flew open again, and the crook entered with flaming eyes. "Hold there, boy!" he exclaimed, seeing the position of the parties in the room. "This is my son," replied Edward Hawley, swelling up to his 6 feet of bone and sinew and interposing between the 2. "What do you want with him?" "Your son?" gasped the rascal, staggered by his unexpected state of affairs. "Yes, and thank God I found him again. Bert, my dear boy, will you own your father? I'm no longer the wreck and drunkard I once was, but a man freed forever, thank the Almighty, from the slavery of rum and temptation of crime." "Father, is it really so?" cried the boy joyfully. "It is." Bert, careless of the danger he was fleeing from, and confident that he could now depend on his father's strong arm for protection, embraced his parent. The crook, nonplussed, stood back in sullen disappointment. There were many reasons why he did not care to attack this man. His known strength and his reputation in the tough neighborhood, where he had come to be much respected because of his efforts to save men from the efforts of drink and crime. "We must leave here at once, father," said Bert earnestly. To this Ed Hawley agreed. and the pseudo-Captain Staggerback was unable to prevent their departure. At the nearest telephone station, Bert communicated with the Hotel Normandy and found, to his great relief, that Helen Potts had been returned to the hotel after midnight, but, as he subsequently learned, without her watch, earrings, and pocketbook. Bert took his father to his room, and there the strangely reunited pair had a long and earnest talk together, in which each told the other his experiences since they parted in Jayville months before. After the attempted robbery of Lemuel Potts's house, Edward Hawley, in terror of arrest, fled to Baltimore, and thence made his way to New York City, where he relapsed into a succession of sprees. The effect of this course, added to past successes, brought on an attack of delirium tremens, and Hawley nearly died in the alcoholic ward of Bellevue Hospital. This, with what he saw in Bellevue during the time he was there, worked a reformation in his habits, and not being a bad man at heart, he resolved not only to switch off from drink for good, but to devote his life to the rescue of those who were fast going the road to perdition, which he himself had so narrowly missed. So he took to the slums for that purpose. After Edward Hawley had learned of his son's business success, the boy told him the whole story of his last and nearly fatal adventure, in which the man Rake had figured once again. "What about this mining certificate these crooks are so anxious to get a hold of?" asked his father. "It is worthless," replied Bert, and then he explained how it had come into his possession. "If I were you, I'd investigate it. It might be worth something after all," suggested his father. Bert had no faith in this idea, but was finally persuaded to look the matter up. Much to his surprise, he found that the mine had recently turned out a winner, a cave-in at the property having revealed an unexpected vein of gold ore of great value. In the end, Bert sold his stock for $1 a share, realizing the sum of $5,000. But his good fortune did not come to him until many months later, after he had been fully established as resident manager of the New York branch of the John Love publishing business through the death in Florida of the former manager. Today Bert lives in a fine house in the Bronx, and a charming young wife, who was Helen Potts of Jayville, Virginia, presides over it, and his father, whom he made his assistant manager, lives with him and proudly points to his son as a bright example of one of America's self-made boys. The end. End of Chapter 16. End of Number 8, The Wheel of Fortune. Recorded by Keith Salis.